Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Scott Baldwin. I'm the community lead and product evangelist here at Productboard, and your host and moderator for today's session. Joining me are going to be Jeremy Alexander and Chris Selden, who I'm going to introduce in a moment here as they come on screen. Thanks, gents, for joining. Just a few things to get us started here on this side. From a housekeeping perspective, we will be recording today's session. So if for some reason you have to leave early, want to share this session afterwards with a friend or a colleague, will be available. There will be a recap topic posted within the community on our site, and we'll make that available to anybody who's attended or wants to watch it on demand later. You can utilize the Q&A for questions. If you do utilize Q&A, feel free to do that at any point during the session. We'll catch up on those Q&A things at the end of our time together. Chat for chat. And if you do use the chat, if you want things to reach everyone, make sure you select the little everyone drop down. Otherwise, it'll only hit the hosts and moderators on this side. We won't be utilizing the raised hands functionality today during our session at all in any way. Joining me, as I mentioned, is Chris Selden and Jeremy Alexander. Chris is a senior product manager at Amplitude and drives development for data products such as Amplitude's data warehouse and cloud storage products, as well as their integration infrastructure. And he's a previous product manager working on data management and new products at Samsung and Criteo. Did I get that one hopefully right there, Chris? Okay. And then Jeremy Alexander, of course, is a product manager here at Productboard and responsible for the platform ecosystem. He focuses on Productboard's API platform and our suite of integrations. So great to have you both here today. Thanks very much for joining. I'm just going to switch over here, and we're going to get started with a little bit here. Jeremy, I'm going to pass it over to you, and we're going to share a little bit just about this integration. I don't think a lot of people maybe have seen it. Some people may not have had a chance to see what it can actually do. And we're going to pass over to you, and maybe you can give a short little demo and a bit of insight into that before we get started with our conversation.
Thanks so much. So I'll keep this one quick. What I want to quickly show is exactly how you'd actually build a cohort in Amplitude, how that process would work, and then how you can actually use that within Productboard to make some really great decisions. So I'll hopefully share my screen and hopefully it'll work. So 1 second. Everyone see that?
No problems.
Perfect. So the way cohorts within Amplitude work is they allow you to group together users based on a set of criteria. And Amplitude is an incredibly flexible tool and allows you to group users based on behavioral characteristics, for example, how they actually engage with your product, or property-based characteristics. For example, what is somebody's job title, what is their permission set, or what are the other unique properties associated with them? And those also include market-based categories as well. So really, the way to think about it is think about what groups of users are important to your business that you want to analyze, and you can probably cohort them with an Amplitude in a couple of clicks. So I'll do one really quick example. Something which might be a high priority for a lot of people are new users. So they might be interested on what does the engagement look like for new users and what is their behavior. In Amplitude, you can actually do this in a couple of clicks. You go into your cohorting tool, you click on users who have been new within the last 30 days, and you click Save as new users. And instantly, you've created a cohort, which shows you the number of new users who've joined over the last 30 days, just like that. Now, what we want to think about is how can we actually bring this information over to Productboard, which would allow us to basically see how important the features are in Productboard to new users, or what are the most important requests coming from new users. And this is actually really simple as well. All you have to do is click Sync To. You choose Productboard. It's a one-time sync, let's say. And you click Sync, and then it's done. So then when you go and transfer over to Productboard, you can go into your filters, and you'll see very quickly that we actually have a new user cohort. So just like that, it's instantly within the product. So there's a couple of things this allows you to do. The first thing is it allows you to segment all of the existing feedback you have by this cohort. So let's say that your question was, what are the pieces of feedback that we're typically receiving from new users? Simply click on the cohort, and you will instantly filter all of your existing feedback by this cohort. This is demo data, so it's likely that something's not going to work. This isn't a real Productboard instance. So let me just actually refresh that really quick. All right, perfect. So just like that, you've been able to segment your existing feedback by this cohort. So we have the power users selected here instead, just because this one was the one I clicked on. And we can see these are actually all the pieces of feedback we've received from power users, which we're able to export from Amplitude in a couple of seconds. But let's imagine that you're not interested in the individual feedback, but actually the trends about what's important to this group of users. We also have a product within Productboard called Productboard Trends. So you go up to the top right-hand corner and you click Trends. And in a couple of seconds, you can actually see how many notes have been created, how many pieces of feedback you've received from this cohort over a given time period, what features are actually the most important to this cohort, and what are the trending tags associated with them. And let's imagine you're a product manager who's often focused on power users and thinking about their needs. You can actually save this as a new collection called Power Users. And every time you log on to Productboard, you'll instantly see this in your right-hand corner, and you can see what two new types of feedback we've received from power users. So that's basically the analysis of the existing feedback, but a really another important thing for product managers is understanding the features we have in our roadmap. Are they actually essential for the personas that we're targeting? So let me jump quickly over to the features board, which is the collection of features that you've built within Productboard or created or have in your backlog. And a question that you might have is, we are prioritizing product executives. Let's imagine that as a use case, because we understand that product executives are oftentimes involved in deals, whether we want to get a new contract or to renew an existing one. So a big question you might have is, of the existing set of features that we have, how important are they actually to this persona? So we can quickly go over to segments. We see that we have a decision maker cohorts that we've ingested from Amplitude. Quickly turn that on. Click Save. And what you'll note within this is that we've actually received no requests for any of these features from the product executive persona. So while you may have an organizational goal to try and support these users, it appears that none of the features within your product backlog actually respond to these users' needs. So this is a question, do we need to go and do more analysis, or do we need to build new types of features? And these are the type of insights that you can get in a couple of seconds. So that's a very brief overview. We have more details on our blog and website about the different ways you can use this, but hopefully that gives you some insight into the feature itself.
Awesome, super helpful. Thanks for sharing, Jeremy. Really appreciate it. And hopefully that sets the stage for a few people in understanding why we think this is such a valuable integration and capability on that side. So let's jump into like maybe some of our fireside chat today. And then again, we'll leave that open at the end for some Q&A from the audience as they're going into this. But building an integration of this type is new for Productboard, and some of it known at Amplitude. I know, Chris, you've done a lot of these in your platform. How did you each approach this partnership strategy when you kind of electing to think about this feature in the partnership? How did you go about it? What did you do? What did you do?
Jeremy, you want to jump in first, or?
Certainly, happy to. So Productboard has dramatically shifted its approach to partnerships and integrations over the last 8 months. Historically, the way we did things was that we basically focused on individual integrations that we wanted to do because they were a high priority. So for example, a Jira integration or an Azure DevOps integration, because they are simply required for product managers to do their job. And the consequence of this is that we were able to secure lots of deals and people were very happy with these integrations, but fundamentally they were non-reusable technologies. And we weren't able to basically leverage that tech to do anything else in the future. So when we were planning new integrations, it was more of a conversation of, should we do Miro or should we do Amplitude or Asana, et cetera? And that was kind of the scope of the conversation. What we've now transitioned to is something called category partnerships, or a thematic approach to partnerships, where we think about what are the categories that are really helpful for product makers. So for example, visual collaboration versus product analytics. And within those, who are the partners that are contained within? So within product analytics, for example, there's Amplitude, there might be others like Mixpanel, Pendo, et cetera. And then what are the shared use cases across all of these platforms? And then the conversation becomes much easier because we think about what is the important category that we want to focus on? What are the partners that are the most common for our existing users? And what is the single use case that's going to drive the most value for our customers? And that fundamentally reshaped the conversation. So now we have a much more focused roadmap, and everything that we build is actually reusable for either new partners, new use cases, or new initiatives.
Yeah. Did that help you, Chris? Did that make it easier to enter this conversation, maybe?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's two parts to the way I think we look at partnerships at Amplitude, especially when we think of what we're trying to achieve for our customers is this kind of single pane of glass, this idea of you can go into Amplitude and really understand how customers are using your product and really deriving insight from that. And I think lean heavily into the quantitative of what you can see of what they're doing, what they're clicking on, or where they're ending up within your product. But I think when it comes to the qualitative and the feedback directly from the interviews we have with customers and direct feedback or the ways in which we get direct feedback from customers through the platform, integrations like Productboard I think allow us to not try to shoehorn this type of data and bring it into Amplitude somehow, but also work with these types of integrations to make this transition of what data you can or insight you can derive from Amplitude and seamlessly get that in other platforms like Productboard here. So I think a common theme you'll probably hear is this kind of marriage between qualitative and quantitative and being able to leverage the insights from one to the other. So I think this is kind of aligns directly with that. And the other part, I think, from our partnership side is really enabling a lot of other partners that we work with to understand what can be achieved through an integration and how do we make it clear and also understand, how, the mutual benefit of a partnership like this. So definitely a big effort on our side, but was really happy to kind of begin and kick off the partnership with Productboard on this.
Well, that's cool. That's really great. You both really landed on a really compelling solution in the end that kind of brings together these two platforms, both the qualitative and the quantitative, which I think is beautiful, and really married these two types of data in a really effective way. How did you approach, maybe Jeremy, that sort of specific set of use cases, landing on the ones that were maybe common across different platforms that you wanted to go and target? And how did that kind of collaboration maybe work between the two of you to decide on what those use cases were that you're going to solve for?
Yeah, so there was a couple of, when we originally thought about working with Amplitude, there was a varied set of use cases that could potentially emerge from that partnership. Things like embedding dashboards or showing easier ways to get this data into Productboard, for example. But what we really wanted to think about was, number one, what is a new use case that solves a fundamental problem for product makers that's not solvable today through any workaround whatsoever? When you think about chart embeds, for example, we could have ultimately, done a link, or we could have done something like that, but that just saves time. What we want to think about is, what are the really big problems that people have and how can we solve them? So I think what we did is we actually understood what is the existing crossover between Amplitude and Productboard's customer base, and did 15 to 20 customer interviews where we just try to understand what are the biggest problems that you have. And something that emerged very quickly is that everybody seems to have a target market, segment, persona, role type, etc., but they don't actually understand always what are the exact needs of those groups of users. And when I try to dive into how they would resolve that, it was sometimes a 3 to 6 month long research process to get that information. And by the time it was finished, the priorities have changed or the needs have changed. So we want to think about, how can we build something that's relatively simple, can service all of these different use cases, and makes people able to get their job done a lot faster. So that's why this one became so compelling as the first iteration with Amplitude.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And Chris, I know there's lots of different types of data, but what types of data did you see customers typically bringing into Amplitude? And what were you hearing from your customers in this context that led to this being something worth doing as an integration?
Yeah, I think the types of data that are typically brought into Amplitude is the behavioral kind of event-based data that we collect is very much the baseline or the foundation of which we build and allow customers to kind of derive their insight from within the platform. So that event data being kind of somewhat of a loaded term of both event properties, like what happens within that specific event, but also the user or the customer who is interacting with that product and the associated kind of user properties that we have there as well. So with that data, I think just as a baseline of what comes into Amplitude, and then the capabilities I think that we have that Jeremy showed earlier today is how easily and flexible, I think, what we can build around a cohort and the definition of a cohort and how customers move in and out of that criteria. We see a lot of success with being able to make sure that the definition and the list of customers who fall into that criteria, sharing that and making sure that's aligned between those two platforms is a very powerful but somewhat simple concept. And being able to leverage that, I think, based on what Jeremy was mentioning earlier, making sure that it's as easy as transferring over to Productboard and being able to know that the features or the backlog items that you have and the feedback you get directly through Productboard is aligned with that criteria and that cohort criteria there. So it seemed like it made a lot of sense, as well as how kind of seamless that transition of one data set to the next was made, definitely.
Yeah, and Jeremy, I know you touched a little bit on the need that you were hearing through those interviews and conversations that you were having, that there was no way to really effectively stitch this story together or tell that story. How is that coming out maybe through the people that you were talking with? Like, how is it showing up?
So like in terms of the way we try to do it was inductively as possible. So like the first couple of questions are, why did you actually purchase Productboard in the first place? Like, why did you actually buy this product? I think sometimes people who are building products don't necessarily know why the customer actually bought it in the first place. So it's good to find that out. Then the second one is, what are the biggest strategic problems that you actually have in your business today? What are the top 3 or 4? And then how are you using Productboard today? And how are you using Amplitude? And kind of taking the conversation from there was the way that we typically tease that information out.
Yeah, oh, that's great. Great to share. I'm going to throw this one maybe over to Chris first here, but like building integrations of this type have a lot of factors to incorporate into this. And what kind of considerations have to be addressed or taken into account when building a integration between 2 companies and 2 different products at this scope and scale particularly?
Yeah, definitely. I think the first one is making sure that and I think Jeremy mentioned it earlier too, is like the customer interview part is understanding like the need for this type of integration and seeing the value that is kind of applied there and how that informs kind of what integrations you go after. And then also realizing, understanding like, is this integration even viable or possible based on the different data sets that exist within each one? So I think that's definitely one of them. When it comes to also like what we do, well, again, going back to, I think what's initiative on our end is enablement for even partners to realize what integration capabilities there are with Amplitude as a platform, and the different data sets that are available to leverage within other platforms, and making sure that kind of mutual benefit is there between both of them. And then also just once you get kind of into the nitty gritty of the integration and kind of the details there, is that object model and making sure that like, hey, will this data even work in a platform like Productboard? And would we have to do further infrastructure type work to make it possible? And is that investment worth it? And there's all those considerations that go into it. And I think that's really where at the outset, you kind of do a quick breakdown there, apart from just obviously the conversations you have with customers and just even looking into Productboard and seeing, hey, are people actually requesting a Productboard integration? So there's definitely, I think, a lot of previous work, excuse me, on our end that we do, and I imagine Productboard does as well, for sure.
That's cool. Nice to see you got super meta there with the going into Productboard to find out if Productboard needs an integration with Amplitude. Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. Jeremy, like anything that kind of stood out on your side here that you really thought was important to kind of consider on this side when building between yourself and Amplitude?
I mean, just from a process perspective, from anybody actually watching this, before we actually began the actual discovery with users or simultaneously, we had to understand what are all of the possible use cases that could exist between this integration and how many of them are actually feasible or not. So we have a pretty comprehensive document where we listed out all the use cases, and based on our understanding of Amplitude's documentation, how we would actually go about building it and what it would be the associated complexity. And I have to say thank you to Chris as well, because you were hugely supportive throughout that process, because there were some things that we couldn't fully understand or we weren't too sure of. I think having that early conversation to make sure we understand feasibility is an essential part of that process.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, it's such a partnership. I mean, it's so huge. And I know a lot of this integration involved data, obviously. And I imagine this might be a little bit too nitty gritty or wanting to get into maybe a bit of the detail, but I think a lot of teams dealing with integrations are often dealing with that data layer, that kind of core fundamental piece of this. And how do you approach aligning, the object models between different tools? How do you align, on the sort of data you're going to ingest or collect or grab from these different places? And what kind of considerations do you have to make when you're making these kinds of integration choices? Like, I imagine these are not insubstantial in some ways, but it sometimes could be quite obvious and maybe, already defined. So maybe Jeremy, if you want to take this one first, and we can switch over to Chris after.
Yeah, so something that made this a little bit easier is because we essentially had a Kotlin-based microservice that we built as like this intermediary layer between Productboard and Amplitude. So it meant that we were able to factor in how will Amplitude actually be sending us this data, and how do we actually build a system that can translate that to our system. So it meant that there wasn't a requirement for compatibility with the exact model that we had, which was helpful. Yeah. I think one of the potential challenges is understanding, what does the payload look like, and is that compatible with the system we built? So there's always that moment of fear before you get that first push from their system where you're like, is everything going to like crash and burn? And luckily it worked wonderfully, so it's completely fine. But there's definitely that moment of fear.
Yeah, Chris, how about you?
Yeah, and building off of that answer, I think there's also from a with the initial conversation, understanding, how is data flowing from one to the other, is if something does need to be done, how extensible or generalizable is it to other integrations, and will the work that we potentially need to do for Productboard also scale to the other cohort destinations that we offer at Amplitude? So it's assessing that, and I think probably even down the line, especially once an integration is established, like understanding that, are there improvements or benefits that can be made to our just general cohort infrastructure that we have on our end? And today we feel that we usually meet the needs of, depending on the platform in and of itself, like whether there's just generally like a cohort list or also just properties associated with those cohorts, usually meets, I think, the 80-20 rule there. But it's also understanding, are there more kind of object types or scenarios where a transfer of one cohort from Amplitude to another platform doesn't meet the current needs, and just assessing that and making sure that we can factor that into the work that's being done between the partnership.
Yeah, that's great. That's really great. I know as you probably got into building this, I'm guessing lots of new things kind of from a jobs to be done perspective kind of began to emerge, maybe like new ideas and concepts that kind of showed up that you weren't kind of thinking about before, or it might have been, new opportunities that maybe sprung up, new capabilities, or maybe jobs that you thought you could do that you couldn't do maybe in the way you thought. How do you balance those decisions, particularly between the two teams, and also like who kind of led and who kind of followed in that journey? And maybe Chris, we'll start with you on this one first, and then jump over to Jeremy.
Yeah, I think Jeremy answered, I think, somewhat on what were the use cases that Productboard saw for this type of integration, and where did they see the opportunities for a cohort type integration with Amplitude. And from there, it's also understanding, like, there is this current capability of cohort syncing and the different, I guess, cadences in which we do sync. So how data kind of flows from Amplitude to whatever destination we're sending it to. And I think that definitely, I think, establishes what can be done between these two platforms. And I guess in terms of the integration in and of itself, for them to come to us kind of laying out where they see the opportunities for the integration, but then also us helping them or enabling them to really understand, I guess, to the earlier point, like what happens on that first push, and making sure that actually kind of aligns with their internal system. Again, going back to like one of the biggest things of the contract, or that object model kind of similarity between both platforms, is definitely the important part there. But yeah, I think it's a jockeying of like who led, who followed, of just making sure that we as a partnership can make sure that we're aligned and moving in the right direction for the integration.
Cool. Jeremy, any thoughts there?
So I think the actual data that's coming in was going to be the same regardless. Like what we were really doing ultimately was we were associating cohorts with individual users in Productboard. That was kind of like the foundation of this. But when you actually consider Productboard, it's an incredibly wide product. We have this insights tool, which collects feedback from all your different sources. We have this features tool that shows all the different things you want to build. which are supported by insights, and you have your roadmap, which is supported by features. And the unit of information that kind of supports all of that is feedback coming from users. So when you actually associate cohorts with them, you can kind of use them across the entire product. And the question is where do you stop? Or what is like the logical place to actually go for a first iteration? Because once you have this data, you kind of want to use it everywhere because you can see the value. And one of the tricky things throughout this development life cycle is we were a brand new team. So there was like a new team member joining every kind of like 6 weeks. So kind of scoping things properly was rather challenging throughout the process. And there's certainly things that we left on the table that we'd like to look back at the future. But I think it was just thinking about what is the core problem that we're trying to solve, what are the top things that are going to help people, and what can we do within this time that's going to show value for people.
Yeah, that's great. I promised a lot of people that we'd pull back the curtain a little bit, because I know the journey of these things always isn't a perfect, smooth journey and often gets talked about that way. But we talk a little bit about the hiccups, the challenges, and maybe you can share us a little bit of some of what were the bumps? What were the speed bumps that you ran into? And maybe like how you might change your approach later to kind of make that easier next time. It doesn't matter who wants to go first, whatever.
I can certainly start. So my team is like an integrations and ecosystem team, which means that fundamentally we operate on other teams' infrastructure and other teams' domains. So ultimately, we don't own our insights tool. We don't own any of that. And all of our code sat on top of all of that. So I think one of the challenges was understanding when we began, we had to understand how all of those systems worked at a really low level to plan our product. But one of the hiccups that might have happened is we might have made some small changes along the way, thinking, this is trivial. It's not really that big of a deal. But then you get a call like a month later that this is like fundamentally in contrast to the technical strategy for another team. So those are the things that have to be resolved. The one thing that we've taken moving forward is we kind of have a dedicated consultant for each of those teams, for each of these projects that we build, so that every time we make any sort of adjustment, even if it seems trivial, we're able to sort of do like a merge request for that change and get approval.
Yeah, that's great. Chris?
Yeah, I think with respect to working and working on this integration and the partnership itself, it's making sure that we can, have we given Productboard or whatever partner we're working with enough info to really kind of to go on their own and build out what they need to build out to make sure the integration works. And I think fortunately we had a shared Slack channel, which I think made communication at least much easier and made sure that we could kind of quickly, if we needed to jump deeper into a topic or a thread or whatever it might be, we could do that, and we could loop in direct engineering to engineering interaction on kind of going deeper into what a payload would look like if a certain scenario happened, and making sure we're covering off on those use cases. I think there was some stops and starts on what would happen if this happened. Oh, actually, this is actually the way it happened. So there's in the beginning, I think just really understanding how stuff works from one platform to the other is always a question, and always an adventure of what you're getting into. Fortunately, I think it worked out. And I think really the communication part, which is such a big theme for a lot of different things, but it really helped, I think, resolve things quickly, as opposed to if it was email, it might have just been a little less, a little bit more effort on both sides for sure.
Yeah,
so I think
exactly.
Channel helped for sure.
Yeah, that's good. And go ahead, Jeremy.
I would definitely do a massive +1 to a Slack integration. If you're doing a partnership with somebody trying to do this stuff over email, I've done this with many other partners in the past. Things can like linger for months or be forgotten. It was really efficient with you guys. The one other thing I would add, maybe in relation to like how is this model going to work, is something that we're also doing moving forward with the rest of the integrations we're doing, is we start the project with event storming or event modeling. So we know exactly how we actually want data to be transferred at a very low level, so we can actually work with partners and customers to see, does it actually match how their system operates?
Yeah, that's huge. Sounds like that collaboration was massively important. And I know this was a really great partnership overall. You've now got these fundamental building blocks in place between the two companies, and a really strong foundation that you can build on to do more stuff in the future. What was really critical to establish as part of that base foundation for you going forward? Maybe Jeremy, you can answer that one.
So are you referring to more future initiatives, or what do you mean exactly?
More in the context of just the building blocks of like having a foundation for good partnerships,
Right.
like in the sense that this maybe set the stage for, this making it easier for both for you to go and get new partnerships, and also Chris, maybe for you to maybe integrate with other partners in the future in a more effective way. Was there some elements of that maybe showed up as part of the journey in this that we could share?
Yeah, so I think the one thing is that we as product managers build value propositions for our products all the time. How do we actually position our product to our customers, and what problems does it solve? I think you have to approach partnerships in exactly the same way. You have to know exactly how does this integration support the partner, how does it support you, and how is working together advantageous? Because ultimately from a partnership, even if you're just integrating with an API, there's some work that needs to be done, either from them supporting you to them making some configuration change. And you have to be able to tell a story that is worthwhile for them to do. So how are you going to support them from a feedback perspective? How are you going to support them from a marketing perspective, the introduction of new customers, et cetera, and having that be the foundation of the relationship.
Great. Chris?
Yeah, I feel like a partnership or integrations in general are kind of this marrying like three concepts of like the value and the mutual benefit of the two partners that are working together. Obviously, the mutual the value it brings to the company with this integration, and then the most important part is like the value it brings to your customer now that you can do this type of integration, and leverage these two platforms seamlessly. And I think it's definitely threading the needle in certain areas. And I think working with a platform like Productboard, kind of going back to the theme of like qualitative and quantitative, it really establishes somewhat of a playbook of like, what have we done with these types of integrations in the past, and where have we seen success, and where are improvements, what improvements could we make to how we currently do this, and is there some nuance that we should consider or improve just to deepen or improve that integration? I think that's really on like more forward-facing or forward-looking type work that we could do. But yeah, I think just having that laid out, understanding those, I think, three avenues at least to begin with, and then building off of that for sure.
Yeah, that's great. Well, kudos to you both. I mean, I think you've both done a really fantastic job pulling this together. Maybe just to close things out here before we jump into Q&A from anybody that's with us today. With the release of these new capabilities, we've probably got lots of customers now using it, as we can see between Amplitude and Productboard, but also both teams now as product managers, like actively learning about new things, new asks, new capabilities, new requests. Could I, might I, will we be able to, those kinds of things that are going to show up. What are some of the things that are starting to merge maybe as capabilities, needs, problems to kind of tackle next that you're hearing? Maybe Jeremy, we'll start with you on this side first and then go over to Chris.
Yeah, so just in terms of the Amplitude versus Productboard relationship in total, I think there are two really interesting opportunities that we want to tackle in the near term. The first is that we actually have the ability to associate data from any source with a feature, which is we've just released over the past couple of days. And something that I want to do in the short term is actually bring in the output of a chart, for example, weekly active users over the last 90 days, and associate that with a feature. So you can prioritize features not just based on customer feedback, but impact by the actual data as well. Mm-hmm. And I believe Amplitude has also released a new API for chart embeds, or you're planning on that in the near future. I think that would also be a really interesting opportunity as well.
Cool. Chris.
Yeah. Following from the previous answer is like with an integration, and as it starts, I think you then, as people begin to use it, as it reaches a critical mass of customers, you realize improvements that can be made just inherently, and either and based on the feedback, again, to go back to the well here with this conversation, the feedback you get from Productboard, from your customers on this stuff, is understanding how with this specific integration could it be improved and really streamlined so that they can take the full advantage of it. So is there a kind of a real-time cohort integration experience so that when I'm looking at Productboard, I'm not wondering, hey, was this based on the last hour sync, or was this a one-time push, or is this a kind of a real-time, make sure when a user does move in or out of that criteria in the cohort, it immediately is reflected on the Productboard side. So there's integration stuff, I think that like that, where we want to fine tune and understand how do we continually improve and make sure that our partners are aware of the updates or improvements that we have to these integrations. So going back to the enablement that we are trying to do to help our partners realize the integration capabilities and stuff there, and also giving them the control on managing and building that out and understanding that. So yeah, I think that's definitely a big part of it. Once you kind of get going, you realize maybe where there are some gaps or existing gaps in the integration that can be continually improved, for sure.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, thank you very much, both of you, for the time today. I'm going to jump over to some Q&A, and then we can wrap things up. Really, again, super great answers. I really appreciate you just giving some context, pulling back the curtain a little bit. Let us know what it's like to be a PM on one of these journeys. I know it's a very challenging ecosystem sometimes to play in, and a lot of people don't necessarily get exposed to it as part of their product careers. So very helpful. First question here maybe is, what are the best approaches you've seen out there in tools and apps to encourage user sharing and gathering valuable product feedback? Any examples that you can share here?
I think if you're going for the scale of feedback, trying to keep it as in-app as possible is definitely the best way to go. At Productboard today, we use Sprig for contextual pop-ups to give feedback. At a previous company, I used app queues. Another thing that I also use that was highly beneficial is trying to think about, can you actually build it into the app itself in between the transitions between workflows? So I was the head of product for a learning platform. And after you finished a piece of content, before you went to the next one, there was an opportunity to give feedback. And it was just an enormous volume of feedback that we received constantly. So just thinking about where are the opportunities where someone is likely to give feedback that is contextual and relevant, and then you can use that to prioritize, in addition to emails, surveys, and everything else.
Yeah. Chris, any thoughts there?
Yeah, so hit on app queues is definitely used a lot within Amplitude, and just again, in-app feedback is definitely where, when you think of the scenario, the customer using the product, it's, hey, I have an opinion on this experience. How do I capture that immediately? And I think through integrations or products like app queues, but Productboard, we have an integration where it's an in-app feedback form, but it ultimately gets routed to our own Productboard, and with all the metadata associated with that, which is extremely important. I think there's also tuning there to make sure you're capturing everything you should be capturing to be able to quantitatively and qualitatively understand that feedback as best you can. We also have customer success and account executives that kind of work directly with our customers, and so ensuring that they have an understanding of how to consolidate that feedback when they have these touch bases with customers, so that it's not only the direct customers who are using our Amplitude product, but also the internal, our internal customers or folks that help with our customers to consolidate that and make sure it gets back. And we also talk directly to customers. So everything really is consolidated in a single kind of view to make sure that we're having a full picture on a lot of that stuff. But Productboard is definitely one of the bigger tools we use in that scenario.
Yeah, that's great. Another question here on this side is, what's been your favorite part of working together on this product or project?
I think honestly, the speed of everything has been wonderful. I think there was like the right level of kind of buy-in from both sides from the very inception. I never felt like I was waiting for multiple weeks or days and to resolve an urgent issue. So it's actually been a joy. It's been great.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny you say you don't feel like you were waiting. I felt like I was kind of put on hold on.
Just being hard on yourself.
No. It's I agree. I think again, going back to the Slack channel, it helps expedite and also bug people sometimes. I mean, not that we were bugging each other, I think, but I was like, it's kind of like, oh, hey, we need kind of a quick response or answer on some of these things, whether it be me talking to you about certain documentation questions or whatever it is, or even engineering asking about, hey, did that payload change we made work, or whatever it might be like that. So I think the speed to communication and yeah, everyone I think was working in lockstep there, and with the intention of building this really great kind of integration. So it was extremely pleasant. Would love to do it again. So.
Well, I think having the direct engineer to engineer communication through Slack is just so important, because otherwise you have these like product managers as filters, forwarding, doing reply alls, etc. Whereas they can just go into a thread really quickly and get something answered in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, so that's pronounced. Maybe another question here is, how is this helping each of your product teams and organizations make better product decisions about what to build?
So there are two. Do you want to go first?
No, go for it.
Okay, cool. There are two specific ones that I like to highlight. The first is product executives is more of a property-based characteristic, but we're trying to think about how do we support product executives to make better strategic level decisions. So we had a list of, 65,000 pieces of feedback, and we had no idea how many of those came from product execs. We were able to bring in the cohort from Amplitude, and it came down to like 300. But each single piece of feedback was so valuable, it actually helped us plan an entire year of work for one team. That was one example. The other is we've been thinking about how do we improve engagement on Productboard. I think sometimes a lot of your feedback comes from your really active users, and that's like most of that sample. So we brought in a cohort for barely active users and try to figure out what are the most important problems that those users have, which were very different from what power users were requesting.
That's interesting. So for you, really, the first time you've been able to answer those kinds of questions effectively, it would have been super challenging. Yeah. Chris.
Yeah, I think when we brought the integration back to our product team, they were, we deal with a few different personas on the platform, whether it be the product managers who are using it, the analytics, kind of core analytics product, or, in my domain a bit is like data engineers, and whether it were just straight up software, maybe more technical product manager. So being able to construct these cohorts and then kind of layer them over what we, the different product teams, what we feel are our main persona, our main kind of target cohort, really helped us inform, like, we have kind of this roadmap or this breakdown within Productboard as it exists today, but when we overlay kind of our target or people that we go after or we speak with on a regular basis, how much of that is aligning with, with that exactly. So I think it really did uncover a lot. And I think even in your demo, you showed like, hey, if I toggle this in, how much of what we already have here is applicable. I think a lot of that is being leveraged and being kind of layered into how we use and how it's being kind of trained the rest of the company on using Productboard, especially on the product side and engineering side. So
that's awesome.
Definitely. Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, both of you. I really appreciate it. I know this has been super insightful for me, particularly as somebody who built product. Hopefully it's equally insightful for the rest of our people that have joined us today. I'm just going to kick over to some things, and we're going to wrap up today's session and conversation. So give me just a sec here. Yeah, I'm sharing screen. Okay, so just a few things. I just tossed in the link to our post-event survey. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's event if you did attend, so that you can let us know. We're always trying to adopt these events and make these events more effective for our community and group overall. If you have any particular questions afterwards, you can continue the discussion inside our product makers community. Feel free to create a new post or share a comment. Do whatever you need to get that conversation started. A few events that we do have coming up in the next little while. We have our Product Makers Summit happening next week on March 30th in San Francisco, in person and also virtual. So feel free to come out and make out for that. And we have a number of different community events as well coming up. On April 14th, we've got Andrew Fregus touching base a little bit on the topic of prioritization. We've got Ian Ames as well talking about prioritization on April the 21st. We've got Matt Atkins talking about building hardware in a software world on April 28th. And we have Michelle Hansen joining us, the author of Deploy Empathy, on troubleshooting user interviews. So this will be a really fantastic group of sessions coming up. And lots of other ways to get involved as well within the community, whether that's joining our roundtables, which happen once a month, joining our Meet a Maker program, where you can connect with people one-on-one, or just getting involved as a speaker, putting up your hand and letting us know what you want to share as product knowledge with the rest of the people here. So again, thank you very much, both of you, for joining. I know this was, again, a great event and great discussion, and I appreciate your time and energy today.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Scott.
All right, thanks both. Take care.
Thanks everyone for watching. Bye.